My name is Emma, and I'm the wife of a survivor of someone with necrotizing fasciitis and the mother of 2 children who went through it with us.
What happened? What is necrotizing fasciitis? What is the situation that we will be discussing today?
So, necrotizing fasciitis is a flesh-eating infection. It's like a bug, an infection, a bacteria that eats away at the fascia of underneath someone's skin. So if you imagine there's a layer of skin, and underneath that layer there's something called fascia. And fascia is, it surrounds every part of the body. It wraps around the entirety of the body, all of the organs, all of the muscles, a bit like the pith of a satsuma. But this fascia, with necrotizing fasciitis, is affected by this flesh-eating bacteria. And it eats away the bacteria, eats away at the fascia to the extent that it kills it, turns it black, a bit like you see if someone's skin goes gangrene. It turns black, it dies, and the fascia is what, I suppose, without the fascia the skin isn't alive either. So if the fascia is affected by necrotizing fasciitis, then the skin dies. And the skin is our largest organ of the body. We can't live without the skin. And left untreated, necrotizing fasciitis will kill a human being within about 48 hours. And the longer someone is affected by necrotizing fasciitis without it being treated, then the less chance they have of survival, and they're likely to die. So some years ago my husband had necrotizing fasciitis on his leg, and he went from having what looked like quite a small kind of sensitive bruise on his shin to within 24 hours being in intensive care. And he was within 24 hours of any sign of a problem, he very quickly went from being okay to being in septic shock and having really big problems with all of his systems in his body. His heart rate was rushing up and down, his blood pressure was really high, then really low, he turned yellow, his whole skin looked yellow, he couldn't function, he was in a lot of pain in his stomach. Basically his body was shutting down, and had he not had the support of intensive care when he did, he would have died. But he was taken into intensive care before they even knew what was wrong, and monitored, then taken in for an operation to assess what the problem was in his leg, which at that time was swollen from his toe all the way up towards his torso. And he had a series of operations to remove the necrotizing fasciitis, because that's the only way to get rid of it, is to cut it out. Even if that meant cutting off the skin on his whole leg, or cutting his whole leg off, that would have been the only way to save him. And in that time, in the 4 days he spent in intensive care, he had multiple operations, and he nearly died at least once, and was given life-saving treatment to keep him alive. And so I was with him in intensive care the majority of the time, even though they didn't usually allow visitors. I think they knew it was touch and go and that he could die at any moment, so they let me stay. But the whole time, I had a 6-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son at home, so trying to ensure that they were also looked after and they worried as little as possible. So I had to arrange things at home as well, covering my work, getting nanny and granddads to help look after the kids all the time, not knowing what was going to happen and if he was going to be okay. But eventually, the doctors and his determination and our focus on recovery, he got better. And after time in hospital and a subsequent skin graft taken from his thigh and placed over his shin, and some time for rehabilitation, he was back to full health, except for a scar on his leg. He rebuilt himself. He lost a lot of weight in hospital. He was out of action for quite a few days, and it was a lot of trauma on his body and a lot of trauma in our lives, me, him, the kids. But ultimately he got better and we could all start recovering again.
I mean, that's really tough. Like, it must have been hard on your entire family. And, like, by the sounds of it, you did a lot, like, looking after everyone inside and outside of the hospital. I mean, what's something you achieved during this time that you are proud of now, that you look back on and you're proud of?
When you look back, there are some things you do that you think, yeah, I did that well, and some things you think, oh, I wish I'd done that differently. But I think at the time I had to focus on my husband. I felt like I had to be there for him because he was in such turmoil. I had to be there for him, to support him, to ensure that he had a friendly face at the hospital. Even though he was in intensive care, he was wide awake most of the time, but couldn't speak because he had a tube down his throat to breathe for him. He was on so many medications that without the tube breathing for him, he would have stopped breathing and died. So having me there as a support, as a way of communicating through writing, through messages, through telepathy basically, I think was really helpful, to give him that presence. But I suppose I'm proud that at the same time I held myself together enough to organise my work, to figure things out at home, to get the kids looked after by grandparents so that they were with someone who really loved them and could look after them. And then afterwards, helping my husband cope with recovery and getting back on his feet, both physically and emotionally. And then it's been a long time since then of working towards feeling better. It took at least the next year. It was very stressful. Everything felt on high alert. It's the first Father's Day, or he nearly wasn't here, the first birthday, that he nearly didn't have this birthday, and it was stressful, but at the time it was just living in the moment. It was firefighting. I was firefighting life. In fact, it happened on our daughter's 6th birthday, and we had to cancel the whole birthday party and figure all that out. And in amongst everything that was happening, and him coming out of intensive care, so we'd had hardly any sleep, I arranged a surprise birthday party for her a few days after her birthday, and partly surprised her because I didn't know if I could pull it off, and I didn't know if it was going to work out or if something else was going to mess up the plans. But I managed to arrange like a big party at a restaurant where we got together with her best friends, and that was really nice. So maybe that was a good thing that I did. And then afterwards we made some big life changes, in the years afterwards, that I think really positively changed the direction of our life. From that near-death experience, it really made us think life is too short to live in a way that doesn't make you feel fulfilled or isn't meeting your life purpose. So we changed our lives, and I suppose I'm most proud of that. I'm most proud of helping to direct my family's future and juggling the support that they might need as time has gone on, whether that be talking therapy or counselling or some other support that's been necessary to help with recovery from the trauma related to necrotizing fasciitis, to, you know, the experience that we had and the effect it had on all of us.
What about when you were going from the hospital to home, or from home to the hospital to work? Did you ever have to change your behaviour from each part? And if so, how did you change to ensure that you were making everyone happy and doing the right thing for everybody?
Definitely. It felt like, you know, that saying, you have to wear many hats. So I had to change my hat all the time. So I was at the hospital most of the day, and I would be there, and then perhaps I would have to come away from the hospital, go back home, get the kids from school, put on a brave face, get them dinner or something, and then arrange for the grandparents to come over, and then the whole time be worrying what might be happening at the hospital, but trying not to show that I was that worried, to try and be reassuring and confident and happy and not scared. But then I had to go back to the hospital and be there and put the hat on of not only the supportive wife who could hold it all together and to reassure and let my husband know that everything was being sorted and organised, he didn't have to worry about anything other than getting better, but also the medical hat and talking to the doctors and understanding what was wrong, what had to happen, ensuring that he had the right care, sort of advocating for him. I suppose that sometimes I was the nurse, so I was trying to do things for him so that, you know, it meant that there was less danger for the nurses, partly because he was put in a private room and nothing that went in that room was allowed out of that room, because they didn't want cross-infection with necrotizing fasciitis contaminating anything that would then go out and cause that bacteria to be on any other patients. And so me doing some of the nursing work meant that that was helpful. So sometimes I'd be the one changing his bed, or I was even the photographer taking pictures of his wounds so that they could see what it looked like in between when they took dressings on and off. So I was kind of wife, mother, nurse, medical advocate. At the same time, I was trying to be professional with reorganising my own work. I was trying to be a good daughter and daughter-in-law, keeping my family up to date with what was happening. And at the end of the day, I'm also just a human, you know, as well as being those things, I'm a person who was scared.
I mean, that's a lot to take on, and there's so much going on, and with such a life-threatening disease, knowing that there was a chance it could all be for nothing and he wouldn't make it. I mean, you must have felt demotivated at times. So were there times you felt like you had lost, or like you were going to give up, and what happened?
I think there were times I was scared.
Do you need tissue? You got this. Take deep breaths. You're doing really, really well.
There were times I was scared. There were times I felt out of control. I didn't know what was going to happen. But then I put my energy towards doing what I could. And I think genuinely that probably really helped, not only practically with his situation, but also with managing my own processing of what was happening. The effect of trauma is lessened when you're able to use that traumatic emotional kind of charge in your body if you put it into doing something. So I think I tried not to let myself think that he was really gonna, could die, although I knew that was a possibility. I never actually comprehended that he would die. I just was scared. So I just had to do whatever I could do to maximise the chances that he'll be okay. And that meant not only for the longevity of him being alive, but also to maximise that he was okay in the moment, because he was scared too. So I think there was one time when I came back. One time, I think a day or so after it first happened, I came back home at about 1 a.m. from the hospital, and I was exhausted, but I was also hot and felt like I almost had to wash off the trauma of the day. So I jumped in the shower at 1 a.m, and then I got in bed about 2 a.m. to try and get some sleep before getting up early to go back again. And about 3 a.m, I woke up bolt upright in the bed, but burst into tears. And I just knew something was wrong. I knew something was very, very wrong. And as soon as I could gather my tears enough to speak, I picked the phone up to ring the hospital. And when I picked the phone up, before I could dial a number, the hospital was on the other end of the phone. They had rang me at the same time I was ringing them, and I had picked the phone up before it even rang. And at the exact time that I woke up crying, even though I'd only been asleep 1 hour, they had rang to say that he nearly died, and that they'd had to insert a central line in his neck to apply adrenaline to keep his heart pumping, and that I should come into the hospital. So after like an hour's sleep, I'd obviously somehow had this emotional connection with him, even though we were miles apart, that something was so wrong. And I felt it in my body. So I just got dressed and went in, because I knew that if that was the case, they were saying to go in the 3 a.m. I was scared that then he was going to die then. But he didn't.
I can kind of tell already that it does, but does this experience and this trauma still affect you now? How does it, and how do you get through that?
Well, in some ways it feels like another person, like it happened to another person. So when I talk about it like this, it brings it back to the present moment. I think one of the really tricky things with trauma is that when the trauma's actually happening, so when my husband was in the hospital, when everything was happening, then you're on red alert, and your adrenaline keeps you going, and people do, once they realise what's happening, people do come to help, family, friends, they come to help. But what's kind of tricky is that once the initial trauma, the kind of the emergency is over and the fire is controlled, if you like, you're exhausted. You're physically and emotionally exhausted. And that's the point at which other people, if they're tired, because they've been helping or they've been trying to be supportive, they kind of then get on with their normal lives. So 2-3 weeks after, that was really hard. Because I understood. I felt compassionate towards other people being tired, or, you know, being able to step back away from the situation. But I had had hardly any sleep. I had had all that worry, all that trauma, juggling all the stuff. You know, supporting my husband, being the nurse, being the mum, being the carer, trying to sort my work out. I had been dealing with all that stuff. And then I just had to carry on. And I had to go back to work. And almost act like I was fine. I had to put a brave face on. As the mum, I had to do extra stuff at home to look after my husband, to get stuff done, to organise everything, to look after everybody still. And I hadn't had time to rest or recover or process what had happened. So I think during that time when trauma's happening and people come up to help, that's great, that's necessary. But then afterwards, there needs to be space for whoever has had the trauma, which wasn't just the patient, to have some time to process and to rest. And I feel like instead of having time to process and rest, I had to get back on board with life, and not only that, but get back on board life with difficulties, because I had the emotional trauma of my children to look after, the emotional trauma of my husband to look after, and I feel like I just had to get on with stuff, and that was really hard. It's like when I really needed someone to kind of be there to give me some space, I don't really feel like that was there. And it wasn't because nobody did anything wrong, in the sense that everybody had been so supportive, and I almost felt like I couldn't ask for any more help because I'd already had so much help. But I needed it, but I couldn't have it. And I just had to carry on. Just had to get on with it. But then also, as a parent, you know, and a well-educated parent, when it comes to understanding about trauma and mental health, I already know a lot about this because of what I do for work. And so, whilst trying to process it all for myself, I was also trying to help my kids process it at the same time. And I was trying my best to get them the support that they needed, which was very different because my son and my daughter process things in very different ways. Ironically, my husband, who'd gone through the necrotizing fasciitis, found it easiest out of all of us to process. But it was years and years and years, and even still now, that I'm trying to figure out the best ways to support my daughter in particular. And of course there's moments as a mother where you think, well, what did I do wrong, or what could I do different, or what should I have done, or did I make anything worse, or could I have been better? Or what can I do now? And all I can do really is just do my best in the moment. And if it's not enough, then I just keep trying. Because life is just like about trying our best, isn't it?
I mean, I know you said it affects your daughter still now, but does it still affect you now? And how does it affect you?
I mean, when I talk about it now, when someone talks to me about it directly like this, then I obviously still feel quite emotional. Every day-to-day living, I'm fine. I don't break down because I have a lot of good skills that help me to be resilient and strong. So I'm not drastically affected by it on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes when I see the scar on my husband's leg, I see it and it reminds me, it's like a flashback of everything that happened. But now when I see that, I see it as it like sparks a memory, rather than a traumatic memory. It sparks a reminder that we're lucky to be alive, that it's important to be grateful for the life we have and not to waste it, not to squander life, not to take it for granted. So it doesn't fill me with dread or trauma anymore. It reminds me that to be grateful. I think the way it affects me most now is wanting to support my kids and how it might be affecting them, and wanting to do the best that I can to help it not have a negative effect on them. And sometimes trauma, not even sometimes, trauma is not just in the mind, trauma is in the body. And it doesn't just go away because you want it to go away. It takes time and patience and understanding. And it takes processing. And that's how it affects. So trauma can be with us even when we don't want it to be with us. So just trying to figure that out.
We've spoken a lot about negatives, and I know a lot of the experience would have been negatives. It's a very hard thing to have to go through, but what about positives? Were there any upsides or any good memories you remember from, like, during or straight after this situation happened? What are the good times you remember?
You know, even in the bad times, there are good times. It's like the yin and yang of life. And I remember even when my husband couldn't speak because he had the tube down his throat, and we were terrified and we didn't know what was going to happen and we didn't know what was going on. We were trying to communicate. He would write on a piece of paper what he wanted to say to me or what he wanted to say to the doctor. But because he was on so many medications, he couldn't write very well, even worse than normal. And he's got bad handwriting, really bad handwriting. But he would be trying to write, and it was basically like we were playing Pictionary, because I was trying to guess what he was saying next, because it was a lot of effort for him to write, and he couldn't even move his head. He was laying down with machines on him, and all the machines were beeping, and he had wires all in his arms, and so we were basically playing Pictionary, and I would sometimes try to guess, and most of the time I got it really well, and occasionally got it really wrong. And he would even when he was really poorly in intensive care, he would sometimes still make jokes and be funny, which I'm sure he's very proud of. He would even make jokes with the nurses. So he was trying to build rapport and build positive relationship with the intensive care nurses, even though he couldn't speak, even though he might die. And yeah, that's funny. I remember one time he wrote a message to the intensive care nurse on the notepad, and she said, came over to him and she said, I have to go on my break, but because in intensive care you have to have a nurse all the time, 24/7. She said, this is my colleague, she's going to look after you whilst I'm on break for 10 minutes, I'll be back. And he said he got the paper and as if he wanted to write something really important to her. And so she waited for her. She thought, I've got to go on break, but I need to see what he's trying to say first. You know, it seems really important. So he wrote down on the paper a message, and she took the notebook, and he'd written, where's your effing commitment? He wrote, which is very funny since she'd been there 24/7 for the last 2 days, looking after his every single need. And she just smiled and then went on her break, which was very funny. And I suppose that also just doing things together afterwards when we could really appreciate how lucky we were to still be a family after nearly losing that. You know, I had to sort of come to terms with the fact that I was almost a widow, you know, with 2 children, a single mum. And then to know that that didn't happen and that we could still have these experiences as a whole family was really important, and that we could do all that stuff. So everything felt really special, although it all felt a bit fragile. You know, oh, we nearly didn't do this, we nearly didn't get that. But then ultimately we did get to have all of that, and that made it more special. And I think, having had some mental health struggles myself in the past, with, you know, troubles with OCD or eating disorders, I could have easily slipped back into that kind of behaviour. When life was so out of control and I was running back and forth to hospital, managing so many different things, I could have easily not eaten. You know, if the cafe was shut, if the food wasn't at home, if I hadn't gone, of course I wasn't going to go food shopping in the middle of all of this going on. I could have easily fallen, relapsed back into my own troubles, but I didn't, because I knew I had to be strong for my husband, I had to be strong for my kids, I had to prioritise that. So even though I was as challenged as I've ever been, I didn't fall into old negative habits. I stayed strong and prioritised my family. And that's important too, and I'm proud of that.
I mean, even to this day, you're still very much looking out for your family. You mentioned still trying to help your daughter process things. I mean, how do you think it affected your daughter? Like, what made it so difficult for her? How did you find that out?
Well, my husband got necrotizing fasciitis on my daughter's 6th birthday. And one day, the day before, she was excited, going to bed thinking she was going to have a birthday party, and the following day she didn't know what was happening, and her mum and dad were gone at the hospital. I mean, that's scary. It's scary for anyone. But then when you put it in the context of a 6-year-old's brain, a 6-year-old can only process stuff based on 6 years of life experience, you know, and considering a child only really starts to have any sort of conscious understanding of, you know, by the time they're 2-3 years old, and even then, you know, the brain is not really forming proper conscious, sensible, logical reasoning until after 7 years old. A 6-year-old child cannot manage that kind of trauma. So there's no wonder that having something so difficult happen so young will have a difficult, detrimental effect on a child's well-being. So that's obvious, but it became apparent after a few weeks of things settling in that she felt like it was maybe her fault, that her brain had figured that something maybe she'd done had caused this thing to happen, which horrified me and my husband, because of course it's nothing to do with that. And so we tried to get support for the kids through talking therapy from school, but initially it's just from like well-being teams or the school counsellor or something like that. And I think our son seemed to manage and process things quite well. Maybe it's the difference between male female brain. I mean, more specifically, it's just the way that they're wired. So they say that trauma doesn't happen to you. It's your experience of processing that trauma. And trauma is about something that is either happens too much or too little or too soon. And what happened to my husband, and therefore the effect of that on my daughter, it was all of those things. You know, it was too much to comprehend and to cope with. It was too soon. She wasn't old enough to be able to handle that. And it was too little, in the sense that too little amount of understanding. You know, it's not possible to make sense of it when you're 6. When your parent's life is threatened at the age of 6, then you feel unsafe. Because when you're little, you should feel like your mum and dad live forever. You know, that shouldn't be a concern you have at all. You really should feel like your mum and dad are Superman, Superwoman, and that they can fly to the moon and back for you if they chose. You know, your life should be about imagination and playing games and being able to feel safe enough to be free and creative, and when you feel like your parent is going to die, then all that gets taken away. It's too much, too soon, and too little life experience to make sense of any of it. And that lasts a long time, because the brain is programming itself. It's learning how to be human. It's learning how to grow up, how to get older. And when the brain is growing in that way, and all of a sudden there's a shock to the system like that rocks your whole world. Like, nothing feels safe anymore. And when nothing feels safe to the nervous system, we switch on and we are in danger mode, and we spend the rest of our time living in danger, and everything therefore feels dangerous and everything feels overwhelming, and that's not really a healthy way to live. And even if you can logically make sense of that, even if you know, as an adult it's hard to logically make sense of these things, let alone as a child, and there's no wonder that has a long-lasting effect on a person. There's no wonder that it takes time to process and understand that. There's no wonder that has repercussions in the body. And you know, you see that in the way things are processed, you see that in discussions, you see it in self-esteem, you see it in how the body reacts, and the tension held in the body and the tension held in the nervous system. And it's a process then of becoming an adult and old enough to then understand what happened, and not only old enough to understand the trauma, but old enough to understand that a little girl didn't understand and couldn't understand. And that's about acceptance, that's about softening, it's about understanding and accepting what's happened and the effect that it has on a whole lifetime. And then compassion to help make it better, without that anger, without feeling angry about what happened. And that's a lot. You know, no 17, 18-year-old wants to deal with all that. They want to be out having fun with their friends, and so it's hard to see my daughter still affected by it. But she is, and it makes sense that she is, and it's okay that she is. And it doesn't mean it will always be that way, because we can have trauma and come out the other side thriving, and they call it post-traumatic growth. Rather than it being just trauma affecting us in a negative way, we can have post-traumatic growth. We can learn from our experiences, we can grow through what we go through, and we can be better for it in the long run.
If you could give one message to people who have been through something traumatic, or have helped someone else through something traumatic, or the whole world, what would you want to say? What would you want people to learn and to take from this to put into their own lives?
First and foremost, that love is the most important thing. Not perfection, not doing things right, not getting it, doing the right things all the time. That's not what's most important. What's most important is love. And whether that be love for my husband, love for my kids, love for life. And to appreciate and feel grateful for what we have, even if it's imperfect. That's what's most important. That's what will matter, with our last breath. That's what will count. And to communicate with each other, to be compassionate with each other, and to understand each other's perspectives. That's all really important. The way I experience something is very different to the way someone else would experience it. And what I need to feel better will be different to what they need to feel better. And to understand and give space for that, to give space for grieving, to give space for fear, to give space for allowing feelings to exist without having to fix them before really then being able to move on from them. And to be there for that process with love and with compassion. And if you can do that, that's the best you can do. And only good can come from that.
Well, thank you so much for talking through your side and your experience and helping to educate people. I really appreciate it, and you did a very good job.
Well done, Savannah.
Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You did so good.
Well done, Savvy.